Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is Muriel and in this video I will be doing a book review for Eleanor Oliphant is Completely Fine, written by Gail Honeyman. This is yet another novel I got wind of through my ex David. Whatever happened between us, he did give me a fair few decent to good to very good book recommendations. This novel has an ASD-coded character you might relate to, he said. And well, yes, it does indeed. Specifically though, and just for the sake of sharing a random anecdote, because why not, he told me it featured, amongst other things, a scene where the main character, Eleanor, gets a bikini wax without really knowing what it is, and is absolutely horrified by the sight of her subsequently shorn pubis, because to her it looks like a little girl's. As it would to me. I'd had a discussion about this with David, about the fact I find fully shaved crotches repulsively creepy. That's my opinion and personal preference. And he was like, oh well, that reminds me of a character in a book you might like. The roundabout ways we get book recommendations, am I right? On a more serious note though, Eleanor Oliphant is Completely Fine is about much more than an awkward ASD-coded character and the amusing, not to say mildly distressing from her point of view, as it would be from my point of view really, situations she finds herself in. Because this is in fact a fairly dark book, in places at least, about trauma, I'd argue outright CPTSD, and what it does to a person's psyche and related mental health. Just like Normal People isn't actually about normal people, Eleanor Oliphant is not, in fact, completely fine. Eleanor's story starts as she develops an obsessive crush on an amateur musician she saw performing at an after-work party or get-together, something like that. From there, you follow Eleanor through good days as she goes to work, as she awkwardly develops a friendship with Raymond, a man who works in her company's IT department, and as she tries to find a way to transform her crush into an actual relationship. You progressively discover who she is as an individual person, what she has experienced throughout those good days, and then move on to bad days, when things unravel pretty drastically. And I'll leave it at that. As hinted at in the synopsis I just gave, the book is divided into 3 parts. The good days, the bad days, and, well, I'll let you find out for yourselves if you're interested. It is a single point of view story, that of Eleanor Oliphant's. And even though I had minor qualms about this with regards to wider narrative context, but I'll get back to that in a few short minutes, I think this was the right choice given what kind of story this is and what kind of themes it develops. I don't have that much to say about the writing style overall, other than to say, I think it did the job of conveying, yes, very strong and deeply felt emotions. Okay, that's not entirely true. I also have to praise the author for the way she utilized language to develop Eleanor's character and the quirkiness of it, shall we say. By that, I mean that Eleanor has a certain way of speaking and understanding others that is, sue me, pretty bloody typical of ASD. If you want intertwined CPTSD and ASD representation, this is the book for you. I mean, Normal People, as far as I'm concerned, kind of qualifies as well, but in all fairness, the representation there is less overt and also heavily enmeshed in a love story. And one has to be in the mood for that. Yes, Eleanor Oliphant, without spoiling much of anything, very obviously suffers from CPTSD. I think it's pretty bloody obvious she can also be read as being autistic, regardless of the fact the author has stated she's not canonically autistic. I don't much care about authorial intent in whichever direction. She's also mildly alcoholic, maybe, sort of. I'll get back to that, and well, her mental health takes a turn for the worse, shall we say, at a certain point in the story. Hers is the sole point of view you get, so you spend quite a bit of time in Eleanor's head, and quite a bit of time seeing the world and other people through her eyes. This is most definitely a character-driven and a character psychology-centered story, which tends to be the case for literary fiction I like. Eleanor is a fully fleshed out character, and her character arc is, overall, skillfully developed. I say overall, though, because I did take issue with the pacing and thus realism of it, given what I personally know of trauma and mental illness. But I can't deny it did feel very emotionally satisfying. What's also really neat about this story is that it features the birth and growth of a purely platonic friendship between a straight man and a straight woman, which is rather unusual, I believe. There is no romance here, but there is definitely respect, affection, understanding, and companionship. Eleanor and Raymond's relationship was thus also very emotionally satisfying, even though it's not necessarily the kind of relationship I can easily relate to. And as I alluded to previously, I do think the character work, or more precisely character setup, of Eleanor's mother, an important figure in the story, was lacking somewhat. I would have liked to learn more, but this is firmly Eleanor's story, and as such, I can understand fleshing out her mother more wasn't necessarily what needed to be done to move the story forward and deliver its themes, but I'll get back to that point in a spoilery section. Given what I've just said about Eleanor, this book obviously tackles the theme of trauma, more specifically severe and long-suffered trauma that develops into complex PTSD. You see throughout the book how Eleanor deals with it, or doesn't deal with it, and the consequences she suffers from it. The experience of acute and suicidal depression is also portrayed, and there is also mild alcohol abuse. I'm not sure it actually qualifies as alcoholism, but Eleanor definitely uses alcohol in an unhealthy way as, medication. This stuff, minus the alcohol bit, is eminently relatable to me for reasons you can learn about, if you so wish, in this video, though the trauma I've acquired stemmed from a different source than Eleanor's. This book, a bit like Normal People once again, also gives an example of what it can be like to relate to other human beings when you are different from the norm, for whatever reason. I think the reason here is CPTSD and ASD both, but your mileage may vary on the Asperger's bit. It shows just how difficult relating to others can be, weighed down as you are or might be by trauma, neurodivergence, poor mental health, and a certain naivete that stems from lack of social experience. Hashtag massive relate. Related to this theme is an excruciating exploration of loneliness. And I mean it when I say excruciating. Rarely have I encountered writing that so adequately captures just how fucking painful loneliness can be, whether actual or, felt from the inside because you are different. And rarely have I encountered writing that so adequately captures just how insidiously loneliness can and does fuel depression. Additionally, another thing I liked about this novel is the way it plays around with this whole idea of saying that you are fine. When people ask you, how are you doing? Oh, I'm fine, I'm just fine, I'm good. When that might not actually be the case, because that's this social norm, convention of kind of faking it and not misery dumping on other people. And I'm not for misery dumping, but sometimes you kind of want sympathy, you want a sympathetic ear, and it's just not meant to be there. And even with people you're close to, it's not always meant to be there. I mean, that's what you yourself think when you're in pain, when you have very little self-esteem, etc., etc. And as an autistic person, I'm always kind of torn between the option of, should I just fake it because that is what is expected of me, or should I be truthful because I do value truthfulness very highly. And I absolutely loathe being asked, how are you doing? Because most of the time, I'm tempted to reply, I'm not doing well at all. In fact, I feel like utter garbage. I cried 3 times today, and I wanted to kill myself, depending on the day, obviously. So it poses an interesting quandary when you are different and when you suffer from a lot of pain, whether psychic or, chronic physical pain. I think it applies in that situation as well. I don't know. The author just did a brilliant job of showing that through Eleanor. Eleanor is not completely fine, but she tries to convince herself and convince others that she is, but she's not, and she should have the right to say that she isn't fine and get help for that, as everyone in that situation should, really. That being said, this book also shows how resilient the human psyche can ultimately be. There is hope in this tale, and there is also a portrayal of the strength of character one only just becomes aware of once one has experienced and survived what I like to call the dark night of the soul. Linked to this is value placed on community, yes, and connection, principally here exemplified through Eleanor's developing friendship with Raymond. And whilst I couldn't quite relate there, sadly for me, I guess, it was certainly, once again, narratively and emotionally satisfying. So now I'd like to go into a few spoilery thoughts, which you can easily skip by going to this timestamp, to be more specific about some of the qualms I had with the story. First, I wanted to know more about Eleanor's mother because you're only given a few disparate bits of information about her. You are given to understand Eleanor was born of rape, sadly, but she also had a little sister, Marianne, and no stepfather is ever mentioned. Did her mother get raped again? That can unfortunately happen. Did she have a one-night stand, an abusive relationship, something else? It's also suggested she was loaded? Did I get that right? Did anyone get that feeling that she was in fact rich? And if she was, where did the money come from? Was there no wider family out there? The whole I hate my child because she's a product of rape deal, I can sort of understand. And I've actually read a French novel, for once, Les Noces Barbares, written by Jan Gefelec, that has this exact premise, and that I actually found pretty decent, if depressing. I even wrote a paper on it in secondary school. Anyway, but then what about Marianne? Eleanor's little sister, why hate her? I mean, obviously the mother was fucked in the head, right, since she abused her children and set fire to the bloody house she shared with them, we're all agreed, but that stuff doesn't come out of nowhere. In the vast majority of cases. Know what I'm saying? Of course, like I said prior, this story was about Eleanor and her trauma, not about generational trauma. So fair enough, I suppose. I would perhaps be even more interested in a story that gives additional context for that kind of thing, and that would probably result in that book getting a higher rating from me, but ultimately, it's not that huge of a deal either. My other qualm resides with the fact I really do not think the speed of Eleanor's recovery, or healing if you will, is realistic at all. Like at all. I mean, granted, she's not exactly on top of the world either by the end of the book, but I really think she got, excuse my abysmal usage of English here, too better too quickly. Then there's a therapist. Needing to shop around for the right shrink fit is the rule, not the exception, especially with more socialized forms of healthcare like the NHS. I should know, kind of, given, what happened with Max David. And I just don't quite buy how easily Eleanor comes to find and then trust her own therapist. A friendly reminder that, yes, this is, of course, my personal opinion, like with everything else. But in this specific case, I also speak from painful lived experience. And, I mean, all I could say is I fucking wish it was that easy, but it isn't. And a last-minute addition from my editing self, I forgot to mention this, but something I wasn't a huge fan of was the fact Eleanor's recovery transformation is somewhat linked to her prettifying herself, or rather prettifying herself in a more traditionally feminine way. She's not particularly quote-unquote feminine naturally, is what I'm going to call it. She doesn't dress in a hugely attractive way. She has very long hair she doesn't do much with. And she goes through this, yes, kind of physical transformation, going to a beauty salon, having her nails done, cutting her hair. And there's a bit too much made of that for my personal taste, because I don't think conforming to femininity is what is going to make you feel better ultimately. I mean, it might for some women, and good for them, but it's not the kind of thing I vibe with, let's just say that. On the other hand, I have to applaud the author for the way she wrote about severe suicidality. To say I've been there, mindset-wise at least, would be a massive understatement. I am all too familiar with the pitch black pits of despair and self-loathing Eleanor finds herself in once she realizes she was basically off her head with the whole singer dude thing. Shattered illusions, shattered past, or memories of one's past, loneliness, hopelessness, all were excruciatingly well conveyed. Like, the author did a brilliant job there. I felt all of it. I felt for Eleanor, and through Eleanor, I kind of felt for myself. Eleanor Oliphant is Completely Fine was a very moving novel for me. Here again, more than a few tears were shed. I related very strongly to Eleanor and her feelings, and I think hers is a brilliant and mostly very realistic portrayal of what it is like to be, again, sue me, neurodivergent, and suffer from CPTSD and attendant depression. I rated it an 8 out of 10 and consider it a soft new literary fiction favorite of mine. I most definitely plan on buying a physical copy of it, hopefully at the big Waterstones on Piccadilly Circus when I'll be in London. Well, by the time you see this video, I will have been in London, and hopefully I will have found a physical copy at that wonderful, ginormous Waterstones. Definitely a happy place there, so fingers crossed. I would absolutely recommend this one if you're interested in portrayals of atypical experiences, difficult human experiences, trauma, mental illness, and, a good character study of an atypical person, provided, of course, you can handle the darker content. But if you can handle this type of content, then yes, it's most definitely a very worthwhile read. So on that note, I hope you found this review interesting, engaging, informative, what have you. Please do share your thoughts in the comments down below if you feel so inclined, or on the Discord server. There's a link for it in the description box down below. But in the meantime, I hope you'll have a lovely day, evening, or whichever time of day you prefer. Do take good care of yourselves, and I shall see you all reasonably soon, probably once again in another book review. But, until then, bye-bye.